Hello, my fellow music lovers. Welcome to the channel. Thanks so much for taking time out of your day to watch these videos. And I wanted to talk about Van Halen in this one, because the last one I did went so well. I was talking about, why Sammy and Eddie don't talk to each other. And boy, did I get a lot of shit for that one. But we're going to talk about something that I think we can all agree on. Who's better, David Lee Roth or Sammy Hagar? That should be an easy one, right? This is a very unique band where you had this great lead singer who led the band to some great success in the late 70s and in the early 80s, and then all of a sudden he takes off to become a movie star, which of course that didn't happen, but he thought he was going to do that. And you kind of wonder what was going to come of this band. They're going to get another singer. Could they possibly do any better? And they wound up doing just that. They got another singer and they took off in a whole new way and were probably even more successful. And so Van Halen's one of these rare exceptions where they get a replacement singer, if you could even call him that, Sammy Hagar. They just get another singer and it's like a whole nother band, and they just, find their own way and not trying to imitate the previous band at all. Nowadays it seems like, yeah, we got to get somebody who sounds like the last guy. You just can't do that with David Lee Roth. There's no way to imitate him. And so I think that Van Halen is a very unique band. And I wanted to kind of just go over what I felt were my favorite songs from each era, my top 5 from each era. And I want to hear from you. I want to know what your favorite era is, what your favorite songs are. Be thinking about that while I'm going through these. So the David Lee Roth era, if I had to think about a couple of words to describe it, I would have to say blood pumping. That kind of music, the stuff that they were doing in the late 70s, early 80s, just got your blood moving. I mean, whether it's Eddie, tapping on the fretboard, or David Lee Roth, with his charisma and his just over-the-top ringleader of the circus kind of performance style, it was just very exciting, both in the studio and also live, too. And, David Lee Roth doesn't come from the school of, trying to imitate Robert Plant or Paul McCartney or any of those types. He was very much into like Broadway, and he was a really big fan of like the Rat Pack. I mean, you can almost hear like the Sammy Davis Jr. kind of influence in the way that he goes about singing and all that. And it was kind of a refreshing take to kind of take those influences and mix them into this hard rock band. And of course, I'm not going to leave out Eddie. Eddie is a groundbreaking guitarist, very exciting. I remember when I first heard him, it was just like mind-blowing. Like, what the hell is this guy doing? I had never heard anybody play like that before. I kind of would have to associate him with the likes of like a Jimi Hendrix or a Stevie Ray Vaughan, just these kinds of players where they're playing, it just feels like it just oozes out of them, like their instrument is connected to them, like it's a part of their body. Just love that about him. And so when I was trying to pick out 5 songs, it was kind of tough to pick out 5 songs because I think that Van Halen in those early days, they've got so many great songs. And so these 5 are just like scratching the surface, but I tried to pick ones that really meant a lot to me in terms of like songs that I would find myself playing a lot and that really got the blood pumping. A good example is from the very first album, Ain't Talking About Love. I mean, that is a classic Van Halen tune right there. I love Eddie's tone, David Lee Roth's delivery of the vocal. I mean, that song to me is just classic. I could have picked a lot of other songs from that first album. I mean, like Little Dreamer, I love that song. They do a really good cover of You Really Got Me from the Kinks, but I wanted to go with an original. On Fire, the way the album closes with that song, they had a lot of like punkish, almost thrash metal kind of vibes going on too. So, and of course there's like Atomic Punk on there too. Just love the tone. Eddie was just on fire from that album. No pun intended, or maybe I did. Then we get Mean Street, my number 2 pick from the Fair Warning album. I just love the riff and the groove of this song, the way the guitar kind of comes plucking in, and then they just get deep into this great groove. I just love it. And then also my number 3 pick from that same album is Unchained. I just love that one too. I just love the way that that song just kind of comes barreling in. And, you know, you got the Ted Templeman vocal cameo with, you know, Come On Dave, Give Me a Break. Of course, Ted was the producer. He was very instrumental in getting Van Halen signed, along with Gene Simmons of Kiss. That's just a great classic track. And it's an album that I love, too. Lots of good stuff on there. All right, so my number 4 pick is going to be from an album called Diver Down and a track called Little Guitars, which is not a song you hear a whole lot about. And it's from an album that, you know, kind of gets slammed as being, you know, one of the worst Van Halen albums. I actually really, really like that album. It's got a lot of covers on it. I mean, Van Halen was no stranger to doing covers. I mean, their first couple of albums had them. And they seemed to like the Kinks because they included another one on Diver Down, Where Have All the Good Times Gone? That's how the album starts. I love that, though. It's really, really good. And I also liked Little Guitars. I just loved the way that the guitar sounds, like the beginning of that song. Just the way it kind of builds up to the vocal. I think it's just amazing. I just love Eddie's tone. And then, of course, that's the song where it, you know, gets into this whole Senorita part. I thought that was really, really cool. I also like the misheard lyric in that song. You know, the part where he goes, catch as catch, and a lot of people thought he was saying etch a sketch, which I know when I was a kid, I used to have one of those things where you can kind of draw with these two little knobs, etch a sketch. That's what I thought he was saying. But yeah, I thought Diver Down was a great album. There was another song called Secrets that I also liked. David Lee Roth kind of doing a change of pace there, real kind of a smooth, groovy kind of song. So yeah, check that album out, Diver Down. Also, my number 5 pick is going to be from the 1984 album, the final one with David Lee Roth before Hagar came in, and that was Panama. Panama to me is just classic Van Halen. I just love the way that song just kind of comes stomping in. It's got all the trademark Van Halen stuff on it. One of my fondest memories of this song is a friend of mine who misheard the lyric in the midsection where David Lee Roth says, you know, I reached down between my legs and I eased the seat back. And my friend for the longest time thought that he was saying, ease the seed bag. And so every time I hear that song, I can't help but think, you know, ease the seed bag. It just, it just always gets me. But something else cool about that song, kind of circling back to what I was talking about earlier and David Lee Roth's influences, is you may recall in the video for Panama where they're kind of swinging around by this wire. That was David Lee Roth's idea that he got from Peter Pan, just to kind of show you where his Broadway kind of, you know, sensibility was coming from. I don't think he told the guys that back in the day. They probably would have never done it. But that was Dave. He was quite the showman. And when I heard that he was going to be leaving and they were going to be getting Sammy Hagar, I was like, uh-oh, what's going to happen here? This is kind of an odd... I mean, I liked Sammy. I mean, at that time, he was riding high. He had just come out recently with, like, I Can't Drive 55. I mean, he was no stranger. People knew who he was. But how he would fit into Van Halen was another story. And actually, you could make the argument that they could have been a whole different band. Like, they could have changed the name. And I remember Sammy even talking about how he and Eddie tossed around the whole idea of calling it Van Hagar. But they decided to keep the name the way it is. Of course, the name of the band is Van Halen. It's named after the brothers, Eddie and Alex. You know, maybe if the band had another name that was, you know, you got bands like Journey and Yes and Foreigner. You know, these are bands with an identity not tied to a particular person. But Van Halen, the name was always about Eddie and Alex. And so getting another singer in, of course, they went through like 3 singers. They were able to keep the name and I guess be able to get away with it more. But they decided to keep it Van Halen. And one of the big changes with getting Hagar in, I noticed, was that the band had more of a 4-member feel. You know, when they had David Lee Roth, it felt like David Lee Roth was the leader. Like, you know, he was the front man, he was the loudest, the outrageous guy. Whereas when they got in Hagar, it seemed like he was just another member of the band. And it seemed like a 4-piece band. They were all on equal footing. And I remember there was a documentary that came out on MTV at the time that Hagar came to the band. And it was a really cool insight into the dynamic of Van Halen at that time. I'll try to find a link to it and put it down below. And I was watching some of it recently, and you could just see the love. I mean, they were just loving the fact that they could all collaborate, and they were coming up with some great stuff. I mean, the 5150 album, I think, is one of their best albums. It's just, I think it's the best album that they did with Sammy Hagar. I think that album has got a lot of good stuff on it. My first pick from the Sammy Hagar years is Why Can't This Be Love? That's the first song that I remember hearing. That was the first single. I think that came out in the summer of '86, and I loved it. I mean, I think the whole, you know, it's got what it takes, why can't this be love? I think it's a very strong melody. You can sing along to it, and it just, the keyboards I thought were really cool. I know there were people who didn't like the keyboards. They wanted Eddie to play the guitar more, and a lot of people didn't like the drum sound, like the, you know, electronic drums. I didn't care about any of that. I thought it all sounded really, really good. You know, the Hagar years, there were a lot more melodies. The melodies were sweeter, you know, the harmonies were bigger, and the music didn't rock quite as hard. It wasn't as blood pumping as the David Lee Roth years. A lot more keyboards, but I liked what Sammy Hagar brought into the band. It was a totally different thing. It was almost like a totally different band. My expectations were different, so maybe that's why I didn't feel like it was a, you know, a letdown at that particular time. Another song that I really, really like is from the 5150 album. It's actually the title track, 5150. I always loved that song. It wasn't a single. It's kind of like an album cut. And I love the riff in it. It reminds me of Whole Lotta Love by Led Zeppelin. It almost is a blatant copy of Whole Lotta Love. Like, it's going there, and then it changes. And I've never heard anybody talk about that. I'm interested to hear if anybody else has picked up on that. My number 3 pick from the Sammy days is from the second album that they did with him, from OU812, When It's Love. And, you know, that has often been hailed as, you know, one of the best power ballads ever. I mean, it's definitely, you know, a power ballad, Van Halen style. It's just got really big melodies, really big harmonies. You can hear Michael Anthony with his high voice just kind of hitting those, just reaching for those, you know, stratospheric highs. Another song that I really like is from that same album, OU812, a track called Feels So Good. And I was debating putting this song in here. As a matter of fact, I kind of had a hard time picking 5 songs from the Sammy Hagar era. Much, much harder than it was from the David Lee Roth era. And it's not because there aren't any good songs in the Sammy era. It was just because with the David Lee Roth era, I felt like there's so many great classic songs. It was hard for me to pick. In the Sammy era, there's good songs, and then there's a bunch of songs that I don't give a shit about. Like, I don't care about them at all. And the ones that I do like, it was hard for me to pick the ones that stood out from the rest. Like, there was a lot more, I don't know what you want to call it. I don't know. The songs from the Sammy Hagar days, you know, there's, like I said, there's a lot of good ones there, but there aren't many that I feel like really jump out at me and are like, yeah, these are really great songs. So I wanted to pick, you know, some songs that I thought that really jumped out at me. And Feels So Good, I think, has just got a lot of good harmonies in it, a lot of good melodies in it. It's a very colorful song. It's got a lot of keyboards, but I like the keyboard tone. Eddie's got a great solo in it. To me, Feels So Good, you know, it's a classic Sammy Hagar lyric about falling in love, and I think the song's got a lot of color, and I think it stands out as one of the better ones from that second album, which I think was kind of shaky. And then my number 5 pick is going to be from their album called For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, and a song called Judgment Day, which I really, really like that song. I think that it's just, it's got more of the blood pumping element that the earlier days of the band had with David Lee Roth. It's just got a great riff, and it just really slams. And that was an album that Sammy Hagar originally, he wanted to call the album Fuck, but management was like, you know what, we might have a hard time getting that into Walmart. You know, I'm not sure if Walmart's going to want to put an album with that title out. So, you know, you got to have the album in Walmart, right? So Sammy was talking to one of his friends, a former boxer, Ray Boom Boom Mancini. And he was talking to him about the album title, and Boom Boom said to him, why don't you call it For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, because that's what fuck stands for. Now, of course, that's not true. I don't think it is. I think that's one of these things that people often associate, but I don't think that's actually accurate. But then again, Ray Boom Boom has taken a few hits to the head, so at least in his world, that's what he thought it meant. Sammy decided, yeah, that sounds good, so they called it that. And so, yeah, that's my take on 5 songs from each era. Just to recap, from David Lee Roth, Ain't Talking About Love, Mean Street, Unchained, Little Guitars, and Panama. And from the Sammy Hagar days, I'm talking about Why Can't This Be Love, 5150, When It's Love, Feels So Good, and Judgment Day. These are among my favorite songs by Van Halen. And if I had to pick an era, which era do I feel is best? I would have to go with the David Lee Roth era, just in terms of, quality and volume. I think that, you can't beat the David Lee Roth era. Every album that they did has a lot of great stuff on it, a lot of classic stuff. I think, David Lee Roth, in terms of who's the better singer, that's a question of when are we talking about. I mean, David Lee Roth, I think, was great in the studio. He had his time. He had so much charisma and character. Nowadays, he doesn't have that. I can tell that he has it in him, maybe, but his vocal range is not there. His voice is shot. In terms of who's the better singer live, there's no question about it. Sammy Hagar is definitely a much better singer now. David Lee Roth, he just comes across as kind of goofy, and it's kind of cringy. Whereas Sammy Hagar can still hold his own. He is having a hard time hitting highs, but he can still sing. And in terms of who I'd rather hang out with, like who would I rather party with, definitely Sammy. David Lee Roth seems to me like he's really full of himself and would probably, hang out with you for 5 minutes and then walk away and go off and do something else. Whereas Sammy is there for the night with you, and he seems like he'd be a cool guy to hang with and probably more down to earth. I could see David Lee Roth being kind of strange and weird and just talk your ear off and all about him. But anyway, that's my take on it. What do you think? Who's your favorite singer? What's your favorite era? What are your favorite songs? Who would you rather party with? All right, put that all down below. Be sure to give this video a thumbs up if you like it. Hit that subscribe button too, and I'll talk to you later.